Okay. Thank you very much for attending this afternoon, everyone. As we've said, today's session is planning to be prepared. Just to go through a quick overview of what this session entails. It's not letting me click through the slide. There we go. We will be looking at things around planning. So I will be doing the first bit of the session around getting prepared, plans, risk management, cyber-specific preparations, communications, command structures, and training. Simon will be doing a bit around testing and exercising. So why is it important? What's available to you? Who should be involved? And what are the lessons we see businesses learn? And then finally, our colleague Pat will be doing tips for a successful recovery. So we'll be talking about encryption, backups, debriefing, reporting, accountability, legal advice, and SIS. So let's begin. So I think we are going to be showing a poll for everyone that's on the call. The poll is going to be around, do you have a cyber plan? And you'll see the responses on the screen. It's not a test, and it's definitely no reflection of you as a business owner or anything out there. We're just trying to simply gauge how many people have a plan in place for cyber. Okay. Dave, are we good to go with that?
I have it running in the background already.
Perfect. Okay. I guess we can get the bit around it at the end of the planning segment. So the first bit is prepare, how to get prepared. One of the things that people need to understand about prepare is you want to reduce the impact. So prepare is all about reducing the impact where a cyber incident does take place. And as an ex-emergency planner for the police, we, as a police, we had a statutory responsibility to prepare for emergencies and respond to them. And that's by writing arrangements, planning arrangements, and that's under the Civil Contingencies Act. Now, I felt it would be really useful to use that structure to provide to the businesses logging in today, because it's really simple and it's effective in terms of how to get prepared. So very quickly, we'll just kind of go over the structure, and that's borrowed from the Emergency Planning College. But it's basically, you write a plan, you train the plan, you exercise the plan, you review, and you change it. And the emergency planning cycle is really the bullet points on, as follows. So determine what your risk is as an organization or a business. You set the objectives to mitigate the risk, and you determine any actions and responsibilities and roles and command structures, and you agree and finalize that. And then you take those issues and you disseminate them to all your key staff. You train your staff on those plans, and you validate by exercising or responding, and then you maintain and review once that's over. So let me just go into the next bit, which is talking about plan type. So I think a lot of people, and what was I didn't get to see what the response was, David, but
I'll share the results for you now if you like.
That'd be brilliant. So that's really good. I think the overall one is people that have logged in have more than one of the above, and more than one business, they have a business continuity plan, a disaster recovery plan, or a cyber plan, or more than the above. So that's really good, and fair play to the ones that don't, and that's why you're here today. So that's really useful to see. I think with the plan types, it can get really confusing, and I think it's really important to kind of go through those plan types. So to start off, there are I would identify three different plan types that you can have. You probably should have, but the first one would be an emergency response plan, and that plan overall is a plan to essentially minimize the impact and help facilitate recovery, And it kind of encompasses the other two plans in some degree, but it looks at a wide range of threats to the business. So it could look at everything from severe weather, or as we're experiencing now, pandemic flu, cyber, flooding, that kind of thing. And you exercise that plan. The business continuity plan actually is, it's in its title, it's continuity really. It's a set of protocols that will allow your business to continue operating during a disruptive event. And a disaster recovery plan, that's all about the recovery bit. So you're looking at steps and technologies to recover from a disruptive event. I think the two questions that I always say that if your plan aims to answer these questions. So a business continuity plan is, how do we keep the business running if a disaster strikes? Whereas the disaster recovery plan is, how do we recover from a disaster? So it is really useful to have those. And I think the business continuity plan essentially is to try and restore you to a pre-crisis state. So I hope that's provided a bit of clarity around those three topics. But I think businesses, all three of these plans should be shared with the relevant stakeholders, and they should be tested and exercised regularly, which we will go through later on in the presentation. So I think it's really important that we understand what to write in your plan, and to do that, you have to understand what risk is imposed on your business. So by doing a business impact analysis and a risk assessment and a matrix, you can really identify what those business areas are. So a business impact analysis, it really does form the basis of your disaster recovery and business continuity plan. It is essentially identifying what is critical to your business, your crown jewels, what do you own, what is important to your business, what data do you hold, where is it stored, that's really important. And your risk assessment is basically looking at the number of threats. So your risk assessment, you could do a risk assessment about any threats. And as an emergency planner, we did risk assessments around flooding, pandemic flu, staff loss, that kind of thing. And essentially, there's some really good guides out there for risk assessment that through the NCSC. We will be sharing some links with yourselves. So the NCSC do some really good fact sheets around risk assessment matrices and business impact analysis to give you guys an understanding of what you can do moving forward. But I will say that there's something called a severity matrix that will also help with your incident response. And again, we've shared that link with yourselves today, but it's essentially identifying an incident as either, so say you've identified an incident as critical. So critical could mean for you that over 80% of your staff are unable to work, and that critical systems are offline, and that is a severe reputational damage to your organization. So by creating the severity matrix, it will help you identify what level your incident is at. So it is a really useful tool. I will say at the forefront of all of this is your information security manager. They're critical to this process. But I will say with doing both of these that really understand what you're trying to protect. Is it your reputation? Is it intellectual property? Is it your customer employee data? And also, the important thing I've always said is, where is your data, who holds your data, and where is it stored? Because I think a lot of people these days use third-party suppliers, and don't be afraid to ask them for information and ask them for their plans and procedures in place to help feed into your risk matrix. So those links should have been provided to you. Another bit of considerations that I just wanted to add is around plan activation. So consider who your end user for the plan is. Who do you expect to report a problem? and who will activate the plan. But I think most importantly, what is the trigger for your activation of a plan? All too often in emergency planning, people are too reluctant to hit the button to say that they are suffering from a major incident. And I think that's because they don't always know what the trigger is for declaring that a critical incident or a major incident. So we go back to that severity matrix. What is going to tick a box for a critical incident? That severity matrix will help you with that process. The other thing is multiple plan owners. For resilience purposes, this is brilliant because you could have staff that own the plan that are on holiday or on sick or unavailable. So it's really useful to have multiple plan owners. And with what is your minimum level of service you will need? So network connectivity and service provided to customers. How much evidence must be preserved during an incident? So think about that. This is kind of going to be gone through in the recovery bit a little bit, but think about your compliance and legal proceedings and what you need if you were to suffer an incident. But that's more kind of for your IT side. And then what temporary measures and quick fixes can be put in place. So this is your business continuity plan. And always consider your network connections, online systems, your phone lines, and network drive servers and business applications. And I think it's really useful to go through the incident response model as well, because that will help feed your planning arrangements as well. So the first thing is to isolate and mitigate the problem. Your priority is to stop the problem spreading, really. And the next step is to follow your plan, but don't be afraid to deviate from that plan. It's okay, because everybody's learning as you go on. Report it. So action fraud is, as well as any other regulators you might need to report to, but definitely report it. Secondary frauds. So make your staff and your customers aware that there could be secondary frauds. I mean, for example, if you look at the current crisis that we're in nationally with the pandemic, there's a lot of secondary frauds that are coming off the back of this in terms of phishing emails and malicious code and things being interjected to look like something relevant to the current crisis that we're in. For example, PPE or spoofed websites and things like that. So just be mindful that could be an issue that your customers or even staff could experience. And evaluate and review the incident and debrief your staff. And was the plan effective? Because that will, again, feed into your emergency planning cycle. And what lessons have been learned, really. So, and very quickly, I'm not going to go too in depth about this, but I think it's really important that you consider creating containment strategies for each of the different types of cyber incidents. So look at it. So ask your IT department whether they've got specific thoughts around these particular types of incidents. It's really important for your disaster recovery plans to think about these things. But it's also equally, if you've got a third-party supplier, ask them the question about how they would respond to these type of incidents. And again, that's going back to that severity matrix. You can add different examples of these in the severity matrix, and the NCSC website that we've provided will go through that as well. And I think we're going to talk about command structure. So it's really, really important to know that cyber is not an IT problem. It's led from the top, and a cyber incident must be led from the top. And your senior management, they set the strategy, and your supervisors, they make it happen, and your frontline staff, they carry out the task. They're your doers. So when looking at your incident management team, you should really think about your CEOs and your senior leaders and your head of communications and public affairs, the information management, information security, IT, business continuity, emergency planners, HR, legal, department service leads, partnerships officers. And I think I wanted to give a special note to consider the NCSC board toolkit as well, because it encourages basically some really good dialogue between yourselves as a board or senior management and your technical experts. So it gives you some really good guides on how to use that. And it's basically giving the gold and the silver officers the understanding that they hold that risk. So that's really all I'm going to say about that. But going in, this kind of feeds nicely into resilient communication structures. Like I've said previously, who activates your plans and makes that contact? Who do you need to contact? So again, is it that incident management team list? Is that done through a notification tree? When is the most appropriate time to contact them? Do you have shift patterns? How contact can be made. So in this current climate, it's really important to know that your comms are resilient, that you have people's mobile numbers, that you have a way of contacting them if something were to go wrong. And, you know, again, who to contact. It's your IT personnel that can get you back up and running. It's your business continuity staff or whoever holds your business continuity plans. It's your department managers to implement those plans. And essentially, please don't leave your staff and employees in the dark if you are suffering from an incident, and consider having a holding statement. I think in the police, we have something called a key individual network. So if we were to have something, you know, in a particular area of, say, Birmingham, go wrong, then we would contact the key individual network. And they could be your customers, your suppliers, third parties, anyone like that. They could even be the police, but consider your incidents, consider different incidents for different type of messaging. So consider the fact that you might need to deliver reassurance messages or awareness messages, vigilance or secondary fraudulent activity messages. This is all kinds of really, I think one of the things that people don't they underestimate the need for good communications. And in every incident response debrief we've had, communications has always come up as a learning point. And so I can't stress enough that it is really important. It's a really important point. And really, how quickly you can act determines the success of your recovery. So don't delay your response and don't delay your communications if you can. And finally, I think we're going to go into staff training. And this is just to tell you a little bit about opportunities that are out there. I mean, now, one of the things we're definitely saying, staff training involves training your staff around your planning. So what you have in your plans, make sure that you are training them, because you can't exercise them without training them, really. It's not fair. So although it has been done, and to be fair, exercising without training does identify loopholes that you probably never thought existed. But it is you know, it is an important point that you should try and train your staff where possible. Now, this also kind of goes into cyber awareness training as well, which is something that we offer as Rakus, the cyber teams, as well as our local cyber police forces, or our local teams on our police forces. We offer free training around to businesses and organizations. And the NCSC also, which will be sharing, I believe, a link for the tips for training staff. So there's some really useful tips for training your own staff. But there's also some really useful cyber incident response training out there. I think, you know, it depends on where you want to go, but there's loads of free stuff online, and there is, you know, it's kind of twofold, really. It's the training your staff to respond to an incident following the plans that you've written, but there's also your IT side of incident response. And yeah, I think that's about it, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any about this particular segment before we begin into exercising. Dave?
We do have 3 questions. Sorry, my bad. I thought Simon was taking questions. So we do have 3 on the list. The first one is, how should the changes with home working be factored into planning?
Oh, okay. So that is a really, really good question. I would say that this has been a real test to emergency planners, because you're having to do things and consider things in a new way. And I think a few really good points that you can take away from this are organizations should be looking at writing some how-to guides for using new softwares that are out there. For example, some guides on business policies around using conferencing tools and other type of networking tools that you can use during the current climate. But I also think that it's really important now more than ever that your staff understands how to report an incident or how to report concerns about something. So making sure that you're communicating that reporting structure to your own internal IT, or whether you have them report directly to Action Fraud. And then also considering the use of VPNs, virtual private networks, for conducting your business at home. But definitely making sure that home working is now written into your emergency plan arrangements, but also your exercising arrangements as well.
That's great, thank you, Vicky. Next one in the list then. As a technical leader in the middle of an organization, do you have any tips on how to influence senior leadership on the need for cyber response planning? Do
you know what, this is a really good one, because we often hear this a lot. Actually, it's something that comes up at a lot of presentations, that how do we influence the board, how do we influence those senior leaders to realize the threat that's before them. But I think one of the things I'd say is that it's definitely important that you look at the NCSC boards, the toolkit for the boards, because I think there's some really useful tips in there. But I also think, and Simon will cover this later in his exercising bit, that is a really good way of getting them to realize the impact of a cyber risk. So I think hold fire for now, but Simon will cover some of that in his exercising bit, because it is really, really important. During exercises, they know that they're in the hot seat.
Okay, and last one. Oh, don't know where that came from. And last one then. Where do you stand on security with regards to plans? We see a lot of requests for visibility and sharing, but the plan has a lot of sensitive data in it. The industry seems to be moving to having multiple plans, one per customer, but if something happens, that seems like a recipe for disaster, as stressed staff juggle the paperwork just when you want it to be easy for them. So where do you stand on security with regards to those plans?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question and a difficult one. I mean, within the policing structure, everything is marked with some sort of sensitivity around it, and there is a clear marking system for where you can share documents. And I think that would be my best suggestion in terms of making sure that whatever document you have is marked sensitive, but also disclosing what departments you can share it with, who you can share it with, customer base as well, who you're allowed to share that with. Because I do agree that the plans do hold a lot of sensitive data, and you know, there's no shame in I mean, I say there's no shame in password protecting things. However, if there were a major incident, you would just need to ensure that you've got those passwords and the relevant people needed to access those documents have those passwords. But I would definitely stress the sensitive marking on any document, and disclose upfront who is this meant for, because within the policing structure, that's certainly how we do things.
Okay, thank you for answering all those then, Vicky. Sorry, Simon.
Just a question off the back of that, Vic.
Yeah,
please. To Lauren who asked it, I would ask the question, who's asking for you to share them in the first place, really, because some of them can be redacted.
That's very true.
Sensitive information. And as Vicky said, in the police, we have got, you know, files and files and files of how we act on things. It's just a matter of getting the right file out, isn't it? So it's back to communications and marking up and making sure you know where they are. Sorry to jump in.
No, that was a brilliant response. Thank you, Simon. So I think that's all for my bit, but I think we're going to have another poll for you now.
Yeah, I'll start that poll now on testing and exercising. Okay, I'll run it for another 10 seconds and then I'll close the poll so we can see the results.
Brilliant.
Okay, let's see the results from these polls then.
Okay. Brilliant. I guess, Simon, that leads nicely into your section then, which
Yes,
is...
it does. Yes, it does. I find, thank you for doing those polls, everybody, firstly. I find them very, very interesting and they're very, very enlightening, and I'll explain why. Very quickly, 80% of you, roughly, have said you have one form of plan or another. Some of you had more, about 35% said you have more than one form of plan. 20% don't. So then this comes to, if you have a response plan, whether you've exercised it or not. So of the 80% of you that said you had more than one plan, about half of you, roughly 60-40, 40% have exercised it, but the other 60% haven't. Okay, and then the question off the back of that for me is, how do you know it works? I'll leave that with you for a sec, okay? And we'll move on to the slides. That's the point of exercising. I'm trying to move on to the next slide for some reason. There we go, move too far, sorry. Okay, so some of you mentioned you'd like some help with it. I'm going to very quickly allay those fears. That is what the Regional Cybercrime Protect Network is here for. We're not here to tell you how to write plans for this kind of thing, for your business. You know your business, we don't know your business. However, what we can do is bring the exercise into the table, and going on to Neil's question previously in the chat, and we're the police, so we're free. So there's a large network of police out there in the ROCU structures that can assist you with testing and exercising your business's response to these kinds of incidents and the plans that you have in place, really. As the slide says, there's kind of 4 types of exercises and testing that we use. First ones are tabletops. These are discussion-based sessions where team members meet informally in a sort of classroom setting to discuss their roles in an emergency and their responses to any particular situation. Normally facilitator-led, who guide you through via discussions and some scenarios. And again, it would depend on how long the session would be, dependent on the type of audience and the topic being delivered. But many can be conducted in a couple of hours to test your plan to a certain incident or scenario, really. And the purpose of those is in a cost-effective way to validate plans and what your plans are for that area. The second one is walkthroughs, workshops, orientation seminars. These are some more basic training, really, designed to familiarize team members with the emergency response process, business continuity, and crisis communication plans for their roles within the larger plan. And then there's functional exercises, which allow personnel to validate plans and readiness by performing their duties in a simulated operational environment. I'll be honest with you, that's my favorite. That's where I enjoy it. They are often scenario driven, such as sort of critical business failure functions and specific scenarios, really. And they're designed to see how your team or your senior management team would be able to cope with something happening. The hardest one to do, I'll be honest with you, I think, is the full-scale exercise, which is as close as you can get to a real incident, a real thing happening. It's going to take time. It's going to mean that if you run a full-scale exercise, then what's your business doing if you're all concentrating on how you deal with a cyber exercise? So they don't happen very often, really, but they are very important because, again, how do you know that something's going to happen? How are you going to respond if something does happen, really? Now, we've already touched upon this before, and Vicky touched upon it. Some of the resources available as you are underneath, I've already covered. There were 4 questions on the first slide. The first one was why is testing and exercising important? And I'll cover it very, very quickly in 1 or 2 sentences. If as a company you don't exercise and test any plans that you've got in place, how do you know that they work? And the answer is you don't. And it's better to test and exercise those plans in a safe environment and to document the decisions and reasons that you've made while exercising to be able to reflect on what happened in the safe environment and to see if that translates to what might happen in the real world and whether that plan you had in place was actually robust enough. So that's why it's important to test and exercise. The second question on the first slide was what is available to you? What is available, and some of them are listed on the side there, on the slide. The NCSC exercise in the box. The link is being shared now. Thanks, Dave. So that would be to test a tabletop exercise to test your management, not senior management, but sort of team leaders on how they might respond to something happening within the organization. Link is shared by Dave. Thank you very much, Dave. Then next one down is Scarlet Web, which is within our ROCU network, which was designed initially by the Home Office and is testing and exercising of the senior management team and potentially the board to live incidents with recording of decisions and reasons to reflect later on. Next one down, Lego and other locally sourced exercises. Again, that sits within the ROCU network. It's called Lego. It's actually called Decisions and Disruptions. It was devised by the University of Bristol. And again, it's aimed at senior management team and board members to get them in front of a Lego kit, who doesn't like playing with Lego, and put them in a situation where they own a power plant, and an office, and then to basically have that plant and that office succumb to some form of cyber attack. And they have to make a decision on what they are going to spend their security budget on over the next 4 fictitious years, which takes about an hour, basically. Thanks, Dave. Dave's sharing the link there with the decisionsandisruptions.org. As I mentioned, that's available through the ROCU network. So towards the end, we're going to share contact details of the ROCU network, because I know a couple of people have asked how you access test it. And it needs to be tested from the poll, 60-40, 60% of you haven't tested any plan. And then the last one, which is Roving Storm, which is from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and the Local Government, which was more resilience-based, but around local authorities. And I've used that personally, as well as Scarlet Web, to exercise local authorities and their response to cyber incidents. So there's some of the flavour of what's available out there. What I would say is contact the ROCU network and make some requests as to how your local ROCU can come and help you exercise. It's very straightforward. As I said, with the police, we don't cost any money. So all we're going to cost you as businesses is time, which I know is sometimes precious. So it leads me on to the last 2 questions, really. Who should be involved in testing and exercising? I think we've kind of already covered it. Everybody, really. But for me, it's a very pyramid driven. We should be exercising the board first. And I know on the Q&A, We had a question from Neil saying, how do we get the board more involved? Well, put them in an exercise. Put them in an exercise like decisions and disruptions, like Scarlet Web, and they'll soon realize, as Vicky mentioned, the risk sits with them. The risk sits with them if the wheels come off. Last question for me, which was the fourth question on the first slide. What are the lessons that we see businesses learn when we test and exercise them? And I've written 4 down. That the first one is they have no plan. But from our poll, only 20% of people have a plan. Don't have a plan, sorry, 80% do, from our very quick straw poll of the people in the room. So there's a heavy reliance on IT. And the issue seems to be that as soon as you mention the word cyber to the board, it's IT's problem. It's not IT's problem. As we mentioned several times, the risk is with the board. The second one is there's a lack of buy-in from the board. We've already covered that. The only way that you can make the board see that it's their problem is by putting them in the situation in a safe way. And then they can actually realize they are the ones holding the baby, for want of a better word, and they're the ones that have to drive this. And then you can step down the levels then, board, senior management, and then into team members, really. The third point I got, when we do exercise people, and we get people in the room, they're occasionally, or more often than not, the wrong people in the room. So again, I'm back to my first point of, you run a cyber resilience exercise, you will have IT members who've been sent by their board members, which is no good at all. Yeah. So for me, the learning point out of that is IT managers need to be more kind of resilient and say, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I've got a cyber incident response plan. Technically, I know what I'm going to do if something hits. We're not here to talk about me technically knowing what we're going to do. We're talking about a business. What's the business going to do? And as Vicky mentioned, what comms have we got going out if we suffer from a cyber attack? That's not IT's problem. Comms is not an IT problem. It's a board problem. So it's a way of wording that, and I think the best vehicle for me is testing and exercise. And the last point, Vicky's already covered it. You put people in a test and in an exercise, and inevitably they don't know who to talk to. The first people they want to talk to is comms, and the next people is IT, and the next people they want to talk to is IT, and the next people they want to talk to is IT. They've got no outward thinking about cyber exercises other than it's IT's fault. You need to have a resilient comms plan in place. You need to know who you're going to talk to and when you're going to talk to them. But the last point is, don't be afraid to say, this is a cyber incident and it's going to affect us. But people are reluctant to do that because they haven't got any comms in place to be able to do that. So that's very quick spin in less than 10 minutes around testing and exercising and what's available out there. There's some links gone up in the chat. Thanks, Dave and Rich. But if anybody's got any questions, now's the time before we move on.
You had a question earlier from Neil, Simon.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know. What was that?
Which was, hang on, I was going back through the chat. Yeah, in a small organization, time and cost are the main barrier internally. Are there any free training resources that can be used for staff training? So as Vicky mentioned, staff training would be covered by exercise in a box at a lower level, or the NCSC 10 top tips for staff. Try saying that when you've had a drink. But also, yes, I agree, it costs money to exercise, but as I've said, the ROCU network is free. We can come and exercise with you, but it is going to take time, because that's what exercises take, and that's unfortunately the way it is, isn't it? So I hope that answers your question. I don't know whether there was any more. No, that's it for now, Simon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Patrick, and I'm going to talk to you today about tips for successful recovery. But before I move on to the area that I'm going to cover, I'd just like to go back to a few things that have already been said. First of all, Simon said, how do you know it works? And that's such a true question, because I don't know if anybody listening has heard of a famous old German general called Helmut von Moltke. And he was the guy who actually used the phrase, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. So that's the thing. Unfortunately, we are seeing people who do create plans and then file it away nicely and keep it in reserve. The problem with that is you don't know what's going to happen when it becomes a situation arises and is tested, for want of a better word. The 34th President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, said plans are pointless, because plans are pointless to the point where if they're created and nothing else is done with them, then unfortunately they are pointless. However, if a plan is created and then it's practiced, that's where the value comes from it. So, and you get what Simon has said there, that's how you then know how it, whether it works and how it works, and potentially, if it doesn't work, why doesn't it work, and how we can make sure that when we gone through that testing phase, that we can then be more resilient when the worst happens. But to put it a slightly different way, it's worth bearing in mind a quote from the very literary giant of Mike Tyson, who said, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. Just a last bit there, that's a personal quote. So in regards to tips for success recovery, when we consider an incident or an issue or an attack in some way, then we can look at it in three parts: risk, crisis, and disaster management. So we're thinking of potentially the before, during, and after. So all we're doing here, although we've broken up into three parts, is really all the things we need to consider before. So when I look at my first bullet point here, I'm talking about encryption. So it's very common for somebody to have a device and have a password on it, which is good. It's obviously good, and it's better than not having a password. However, depending on what kind of device it is, depending on how beneficial that password is in terms of preventing somebody getting into it. However, encryption is a whole new game. If something's encrypted and password protected, of course, that's where the security seriously comes in that you password protect something, yes, it's password protected, but unfortunately, you're going to get around passwords very easily in comparison to whether data is encrypted. But in terms of that as well, so in terms of successful recovery, you could have things backed up, like we're referring to in the next bullet point. Backups are essential. It goes without saying, backups are essential. However, if your backup is encrypted, then the backup is obviously as safe as you can possibly make it. But to highlight with backups, the ideal situation with a backup is you get subjected to a ransomware attack and your backups are not, unfortunately, secured, or in fact, sadly, you don't even have a backup. Unfortunately, you're at the mercy of this person who's potentially subjected you to a ransomware attack and is demanding money before releasing the data. However, if you have a backup, you could give them the two-finger salute, and then you can reset and then sort of restore from your backups. A good way to think about backups is the 1-3-2 rule. So I haven't suddenly forgotten that account. What I'm referring to there is that you save one thing 3 times in 2 locations. That's the ultimate way to back up. But I appreciate, of course, the bigger the organization, the less simple that is, of course, the more complex that can be. But it's one of the things that I'd like to highlight as to being pretty essential. reporting we've got here. See, unfortunately, in a real world example, we could say that if somebody lives, or a number of people live in a house, say a cul-de-sac or a road, and every second, third house is getting burgled, but they don't report it. Unfortunately, the patrol plans for the police, the local police, will not include that road because, while that road's okay, we never get any crime or anything happening there. It has to be reported, and it has to be reported for a number of reasons. Because in 2016, they created the National Cybersecurity Program, and it's a program running from 2016 to 2021. And the government has provided 1.9 billion to make the UK a hostile environment for cyber criminals. The reason for that, amongst other things, was because of research conducted into the risk, the true risk to us from fraud and cybercrime and online crime, online attacks. So thankfully, the research has shown the true nature of the threat, because if it was down to the reporting, unfortunately, it's a dramatically underreported type of crime, then we probably wouldn't have put those resources into it. Because I'm a West Mids police officer seconded to the ROCU, and my salary comes from the central budget, not the local policing budget. So it's just worth bearing in mind the importance of obviously reporting. If we don't know about something, we can't do anything about it. So debriefing is there because the ideal scenario is that you have a plan and it gets practiced, and then practiced again. Each time you practice it, you will come across issues that, oh, I'm glad this has happened with my friend practicing with us, because if it didn't, we would have been finding out about this, unfortunately, when the real thing happened. So the point being that when we practice, we need to debrief. We need to debrief in practice, but we need to debrief, sadly, if the worst happened as well, just try and learn some lessons, because we can constantly learn. Learning is a cycle, and there's no two ways about it. We will make mistakes, sadly. There's no two ways about it. But if we practice beforehand, maybe those mistakes are minor as opposed to major, and less frequent minor, so that they don't mount up to a major. And it's realistic recovery time. Well, it is worth bearing in mind that, unfortunately, which I know the previous webinar that was conducted by one of our colleagues talked quite a bit about the dwell time. And yeah, the dwell time is basically, I'm conscious if people are listening who have gone to the previous one, I don't want to bore you with repetition, but it is worth bearing in mind that dwell time represents the length of time a cyber attacker has free reign in an environment from the time they get in until they get eradicated and stopped in their tracks. So it's just worth bearing in mind. So like, we are unfortunately often in a culture of, it has to be said, sadly, of more blame and shame as opposed to learn and develop. And see what leads onto that is, if God forbid an employee in an organization did click on a link or download an attachment and they thought, oh, they realized almost straight away, they thought, oh my God, I can't say anything. But if they don't say anything, then it's giving them extended dwell time for the cyber criminal or the offender to do something which, if they get reported straight away. But of course, the reality as well, balanced against theory, their fear is about the blame and shame as opposed to the support and the learn and develop. So accountability we've mentioned here, because unfortunately, the police were quite good at crisis management. We deal with crisis on a low to large level on a regular basis. And there is a balancing act between actually doing something and recording what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and what we should do next. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but it unfortunately, when the dust settles, there needs to be ideally a log of events, decisions and actions and requests, so that what we did, why we did it, how we did it, and made more to the point why we did it. And then it leads me on to legal advice. You know, we talk a lot about the Data Protection Act, but obviously we talk even more these days about the GDPR, the General Data Protection legislation. And And that's a bit of a game changer in a way, because that's almost heightened the need to report when you are subjected, sadly, to a data breach. I do think I definitely want to mention at this point that's something which may surprise a lot of people. We as protect officers and prepare officers, we have been very clearly informed that we will not report you as a company to the Information Commissioner's Office. And what I mean by that is, let's say sadly, last week, somebody was subjected to a data breach, and you think, you know, I need to get my act together. And I'll speak to Rocco's and I'll get them in. We'll do training, we'll do internal training and data. But you thought, oh, but if I haven't reported this, and if I because I haven't reported it, I get these guys in, it's likely to come up, and then they're going to report me to the ICO. Well, we want to reassure you that we won't be doing that. And the reason why we won't be doing that is because we've been told we're not doing it. And the reason why we've been told that is because we don't want somebody to have been subjected to a data breach last week, who wants to really get things sorted and get things into gear, but to be prevented from doing so due to the fear that we're going to report them to the ICO. It would be a lose-lose situation. So we just think, best case scenario, let's improve as we go rather than prosecute, to want of a better word, just because you had the issue dealt with appropriately, hopefully. But then we wouldn't, as protect and prepare officers, come in, find that out, and then report you. And I just think that's important, because I wouldn't want people to be put off from contacting us. And the last thing on this slide is CISP. The CISP, hopefully, majority are members, but if you're not, and if you're not aware, CISP stands for the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Partnership. And it's a joint public-private sector cybersecurity platform. And if you don't have membership, then please go onto the NCSE website and apply for membership, because they'll probably say, once you've applied for membership, before you do apply for membership, you have to have somebody like myself, if you're in the West Mids area, as a sponsor. So to go on CISP, when you fill in your application, it'll say your sponsor details. So you do need that before you make the application. So yeah, the ideal situation is that you make contact with the ROCU officers, and then say, if I use you as a sponsor, and you fill in the application, they'll send the email, say to me, and I say, yeah, I know the person. I can verify they should have access, it's appropriate, send it back. And it's usually quite a quick turnaround. In theory, when all things work well, from you applying to me authorizing and you getting access should be about 5 days. So the last bit here is about support and resources. The National Cybersecurity Centre, which came out of this 1.9 billion, have got an extremely good website that gets updated they create weekly threat assessments, and they create sometimes even daily alerts. But one of the things they have here is the Response and Recovery Small Business Guide, and it's for small and medium enterprises. But don't get me wrong, it's not just for small and medium enterprises. If you go onto their website, or even just go onto the website and look for Response and Recovery, you'll see small and medium enterprises, and for larger organizations, please look here. And as Simon was saying, so there's lots of things that are out there, and some of which you can gain access to yourself, like Exercise in a Box. Exercise in a Box, you don't need us. You can create an account and you can do some internal training. However, we are more than happy to facilitate these training days with you and your organization, and we'll run a number of exercises. But as Simon rightly said, he's highlighted at least 3 or 4 other opportunities, and we're quite happy to come in and the benefit of our experience in the cybersecurity world and run internal training. And it's like, I've had organizations, I've had companies that have talked about, we try to tell our bosses this and that, but they just don't really listen to us. But we come in as a regional organised crime unit, and they we basically say sometimes the same thing as their IT experts, their cybersecurity professionals, but it just seems to hit home a bit more. So when you again, with regards to that question about getting management involved, there's no 2 ways about it. They have to be involved. If they're not involved, then unfortunately, have limited impact. So I think I appreciate there's a bit more on the slide here, but I'm conscious that I don't want to bore people by reading out a slide that they can see. So I'm quite happy to maybe go on to questions.
Okay, Patrick, you've got 3 questions. In fact, no, one's gone back to Simon. I'll come back to you in a minute, Simon. So, is there an order that these things should be conducted in a recovery? I'm guessing this is from your successful recovery slide.
Well, it depends on the incident, unfortunately. And it's see, when you say order, sorry, just to clarify, is there an order of things that should be conducted in recovery? Well, it's a bit about first things. Oh, sorry about that. First things first, obviously establishing going on. Is it just an unfortunate somebody drilled through some cables outside and your network's gone down? Have you been attacked? Is it a cyber attack or is it not? So it's about identifying the incidents. Like, is it an attack or is it just a technical incident? And it's about, and following on from that, identifying and evaluating it in that, well, okay, we're having some access problems, for want of a better word. How wide ranging is it? So yeah, and in recovery from incidents, there is communication. I think everything that we talk about, I don't think we can say anything that isn't related to communication.
Okay, thank you for that, Patrick. Another one then, how do we mitigate the risks from ransomware in the cloud when using those systems to share and back up vital data?
Well, one of the things I'd say there is you hear these incidents where backup data gets infected at the same time as the other data because it's been in the cloud. I think, it's extremely, one of the answers to this is extremely straightforward and simple in that it's passwords. One of the key words to cybersecurity is passwords. And I would encourage somebody to Google the top 10 passwords currently, and they'll see the top 10. And people are still using password 123. But in addition to passwords being as simple as 123, they're also being reused. And the reason why I'm coming back to the storage in the cloud, the problem is passwords being reused. So when when a password's been broken into and data has been stolen and it's going to be locked down, unfortunately, so too is the backup because the same passwords are being used. So the cybersecurity, the security on the cloud storage is a good way to go. But unfortunately, what makes it mega weak and almost pointless being backed up is some of the approaches people have, such as using the same password.
And also leaving it signed in. You can back up and come out, sign out. You can back up, sign out. You can share information, sign out. I think if we leave cloud backup signed in, then it's like leaving a USB attached to the machine, in effect. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's a really good point. It's about staying signed in. Is there any real need to be signed in? Quite right.
Okay, and one more popped up while you were talking then. Would you recommend a hot debrief first for people's welfare?
Yes, I would. Because for a couple of reasons. For a couple of scenarios I'd run by would be, so the short answer is absolutely yes, I would. So that's the short answer. And some reasons for that are that couple of examples. So for example, let's say one employee has clicked on a link and downloaded an attachment and unfortunately, innocently caused potential lockdown, ransomware attack. That person needs support, unfortunately, because of the stresses and strains that they're probably going to be fit under. And following on from that as well, the people who are dealing with it and are under the cosh to try and get things up and running sooner rather than later. And it's quite clear that the stresses and strains will have an effect with and without people even knowing about it. So I definitely think, and I really think it's a brilliant question. I'm really glad someone asked it, because I wanted to mention something of that similar nature.
Okay, great. And then last question is actually back for Simon on exercising. How often should businesses exercise their plans? Is it different for boards or IT departments?
I think the first part is very straightforward. How often should they exercise their plans? Every year at minimum, yearly, or if something significant changes, like an addition to the business or a loss of a certain arm of a business or something like that. The second one, is it different for boards and departments? Yes. IT departments are dealing with incidents a lot more frequently than boards. So IT departments are getting to see cyber incidents a lot more. In relation to boards, they're not. So that's why it should be a minimum of a year, once a year, sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all the questions gone through. So now it's just a matter of kind of showing you where to go to see the next in our webinar sessions. So let me just point you to my Internet Explorer page. I'm just going to stop the share for Patrick and share my screen. So for the next webinar in series, hopefully you can see my internet browser here. If you go to the search events box at the top here and type in national policing, you will see what comes up, which is a further links to our series here. This one isn't actually in sequence, so you can click on any one of these for now. Is this our logo here? Just let it load. If you scroll down to the bottom and click on National Policing Protect Network, you will see that all of the events come up in order. We've got 4 more coming. The next one is on Thursday, and again, that's at 2 o'clock, and it's called It Started With a Fish. So that is how you can reach us further. At the end of this session, so when you finish here today, you'll be directed towards our survey. If you wouldn't mind filling that in, it is very quick, short 6 questions. Most of them are ticky boxes. But if you could just give us your feedback, it helps us design the webinar material and to give feedback to our panelists and our team running the webinar series. But we thank you again, and thank you to all of our presenters. That's Simon from Tarion and Patrick and Vicky from the West Midlands Police. And we hope to see you at the next one. Thank you very much.